So UFC 290 is coming up soon, and it is going to be a fantastic International Fight Week card, and I genuinely cannot wait to watch it, and so much so that I'm going to be doing an early prediction video about a week before the fights even start. So this should be a great card. I cannot wait to talk about it. I will be doing a live Fight Companion live stream when the card is on as well on my YouTube channel, so if you're interested in that, please do tune in. And before I do finally get into my predictions, I will mention my 125% sign up bonus to BetUS, which you can get there in the description of this video. And also you can get a 3-day free trial by signing up to the We Want Picks premium membership service and putting in the code ARTEM. And with all of that being said, let's get into what is the first fight on the card on this Tapology list. Maybe it could change, but the first fight on the card is Edgar Chairez taking on Tatsuro Taira. And this fight is short notice. It was actually only added to this card the day that I'm recording this video in the morning, and it's going to be a good one. Edgar Chairez was meant to be on Dana White's Contender Series taking on Felipe Dos Santos, who was a teammate of Charles Oliveira, and he's been pulled from Dana White's Contender Series to fight Tatsuro Taira, and I understand. It makes sense to me. You get a 14th fight on the card, you get two up-and-coming guys with a lot of hype around them, mainly on the Taira side, but Edgar Chairez is from Mexico, and Mexico does seem to be a market that is booming right now for the UFC. So putting him on the card, pulling him from Dana White's Contender Series does make sense. Now, Taira was meant to fight last week, but unfortunately his opponent did miss weight, and the bout just didn't continue. So we've got this fight instead, and it's going to be a good one. I think Edgar Chairez could be a pretty live underdog in this matchup. Now, Chairez is very, very big for 125 pounds. He's fought on Dana White's Contender Series before, and it was another short notice fight against Clayton Carpenter, and he looked good in that first round, man, but he did slow down towards the end because, as I said, it was a short notice opportunity. He's really big for 125 pounds. I would assume that this guy does cut a lot of weight to make 125, but he's a well-rounded fighter. You know, he can KO guys on the feet, but he can also get it done in the grappling as well, and in the grappling is where he won his last fight, which was that very, very unfortunate circumstance where the grappling went viral. He submitted a guy. The guy was unconscious for a long time. It was really, really bad, but it wasn't really Chairez's fault. It was more the ref. But with that being said, we'll move on to Tatsuro Taira. Tatsuro Taira is a very, very hyped up prospect, man. He's from Japan. Very good offensive grappler, a decent wrestler as well. On the feet, he is quite awkward. It's definitely a part of his game that is developing, but it is something that is not too bad. You know, he's not going to be in a lot of trouble every time he's on the feet. He does kind of have a little bit of striking behind him, but he does excel in the grappling. Very, very good grappler when the fight gets to the mat, and I do believe he can get this fight to the mat against Edgar Chairez. Edgar Chairez probably wants the fight to be on the feet, but I think Tatsuro Taira will be able to get it down to the mat. I think he can submit Edgar Chairez at some point, maybe in the first 2 rounds, but as I said, Chairez is a massive guy for 125 pounds, so maybe he does have a chance of getting something done. Only 1% of people picking Chairez, but I think Chairez has got a good chance in this matchup, but I am going to be picking Taira by submission. And now we move on to another short notice fight, Cameron Saaiman taking on Terrence Mitchell. Cameron Saaiman was meant to take on Christian Rodriguez, and that would have been a fun prospect versus prospect fight. But instead, now we've got Cameron Saaiman taking on Terrence Mitchell, who is taking this fight on short notice, and I believe this fight was announced about a week ago. There are betting odds out for this fight. Cameron Saaiman is minus 350, Terrence Mitchell is plus 285. Now, Terrence Mitchell is a guy that a lot of you people might actually recognize because he did fight on The Ultimate Fighter way back in 2016 as a flyweight. And I'm very glad he's moved up to 135 pounds because he was very big for 125. He was 5'10", I believe, and he was just very skinny. Since then, he has put on a little bit of muscle, and he has got some pretty good wins since he has had that fight way back when. He did take a lot of time off, about 4 years away from the sport, and now he's back in it, and he's actually had a lot of success in the grappling over on some regional scene over in Alaska. But the problem with Terrence Mitchell is his level of competition throughout his entire career hasn't really been very high, and on the feet as well, especially on The Ultimate Fighter, he did look quite awkward. I feel like he probably is, for the most part, a grappler. He does have a lot of KOs earlier on in his career, but it seems like recently he's kind of focused on the grappling, and against Cameron Saaiman is good everywhere. You know, Cameron Saiman's a great kickboxer. He does have a base in grappling. I would describe his earlier sort of fights as a grappling heavy style, but he's developed the striking to the point where you could even argue that his striking probably is better than his grappling. He's very good everywhere. He looks very good in his last fight against Stephen Kozlov, and Stephen Kozlov did take that fight on short notice, but that was a very good grappling fight, and it really did display that Cameron Saaiman does have good grappling to fall back on. In this matchup, Terrence Mitchell needs this fight to go to the ground to have success, but I think Cameron Saaiman is good enough to keep it standing, and I think he probably can beat Terrence Mitchell in a striking fight on the feet. Maybe he can find a KO, because Terrence Mitchell's striking doesn't look too impressive. He does seem a little bit hittable. Obviously, it's improved, but I can see Saaiman maybe finding a finish or winning a decision by keeping the fight on the feet. So give me Cameron Saaiman by knockout or decision in this matchup. And now Jimmy Crute is taking on Alonzo Menifield in a rematch. And the rematch is interesting because you don't normally see rematches happen off draws. But after the fight, they both did agree to a rematch. And, oh well, makes sense. In the fight, you know, Jimmy Crute was having success with his wrestling and his grappling. But Alonzo Menifield was having a lot of success with his striking as well. And the reason why he was having a lot of success on the feet is because Jimmy Crute is not a very good striker. You know, this guy gets compared to Ronda Rousey in the striking, and that is not a good comparison to have, especially in hindsight, now that we know that Ronda Rousey's striking wasn't as good as people did make it out to be way back when in like 2015. However, Jimmy Crute is a very good grappler, and he does find the most success when he does get the fight to the ground, and he had success against Alonzo Menifield in that department. But I am still going to pick Alonzo Menifield. I picked Alonzo Menifield in the first fight. I'm going to pick him again in this matchup as well. And I do think Alonzo Menifield can go out there and find the knockout over Jimmy Crute in this matchup. Jimmy Crute's striking is not very impressive to me. He's very hittable on the feet. And I just don't see him being able to have the same success again. I think Alonzo Menifield probably knocks him out in the first round. And I think he wins the fight that way. Now, Menifield is a guy that, you know, he knocked out Misha Sarkinov, who's also a grappler. He knocked out Eshka Mosharov in that weird fight where Eshka Mosharov's, you know, we didn't know that Eshka Mosharov was actually 17-13. The UFC thought that this guy's 21-6, but that's a different story for another day. I believe Alonzo Menifield is probably a very slight favorite. He is about -125, -115 on some sports books. It's actually even odds on a couple of other sports books. So yeah, you're getting a very closely lined fight. So there probably will be a lot of people on Jimmy Crute, but I am on the Alonzo Menifield side by knockout. I do think he can catch Jimmy Crute. Crute is very hittable on the feet, and I think Alonzo Menifield can find the knockout blow. And now we've got Vitor Petrino taking on Marcin Prachnio. And this should be a fun fight, but I think also it very well could be a showcase fight for Vitor Petrino if it goes well. If it doesn't go well, Marcin Prachnio has success and picks him apart on the feet for 3 rounds. I do pick Vitor Petrino to win this fight by knockout, but it's a tough matchup for him. It's another step up in competition. If you guys don't know, Vitor Petrino fought on Dana White's Contender Series recently against Rodolfo Bellato. That was actually a rematch because Vitor Petrino beat Rodolfo Bellato in his very, very first fight against Rodolfo Bellato when Bellato was like 5-0. They did a rematch. It was a fun fight. Petrino knocked him out. And then he took on Anton Tokaj. And that was a weird fight where it was actually Vitor Petrino that was initiating a lot of the wrestling and a lot of the grappling, which is odd because I would describe Vitor Petrino as a striker and Anton Tokaj as a grappler. But we saw Petrino going for wrestling. We saw Petrino going for takedowns. So maybe he was just trying to show off the fact that he can kind of do a lot of things. It was a fun fight. It was a weird fight. But I think Vitor Petrino can mix it up against Prachnio. But I do think he can actually knock out Marcin Prachnio because he does have insane power on the feet. If I do find the odds, he's sitting at -250 on some sports books and about +200, +210 on most others. Prachnio is coming off that weird win over William Knight where Knight did literally nothing, and Prachnio had a lot of success with the leg kicks. Maybe he could have the same success with the leg kicks against Vitor Petrino, a guy that is a power puncher, a guy that is a very dangerous striker, a guy that you don't want to be standing in front of because this guy can load up and land. And I am still going to be going with the Petrino by KO side. I think he can get it done. I mean, it would be odd if he mixed in the wrestling, but maybe he does that again. He mixed in wrestling against Tokaj. It was weird. It was a weird fight. If you haven't seen it, I recommend that you do. I think it actually got fight of the night. It was a pretty fun fight, but it was just an odd performance. But I think Petrino goes out there, does what he does best, and knocks out Marcin Prachnio in the matchup. And now we've got another interesting fight. You've got Kamuela Kirk taking on Esteban Ribovics. And if you guys know me, you guys know I'm a big fan of Esteban Ribovics. I am a huge fan of him. I was very, very excited for his UFC debut, which was meant to be against Kamuela Kirk. And he ended up taking on Loic Radzhabov instead on short notice. And Loic Radzhabov did manage to win that fight. He did take down Esteban Ribovics a lot Ribovics showed pretty bad takedown defense in that matchup, but every time the fight was on the feet, Ribovics was having success. Ribovics was hurting Radzhabov, and that's why I eventually picked Mateusz Rebecki to beat Loic Radzhabov, was because of the success that Esteban Ribovics was having on the feet against Loic Radzhabov in the matchup. Now, this is a much easier matchup for Ribovics, in my opinion. Kamuela Kirk is coming up from 145 pounds. You know, he was a guy that was signed very recently, actually, sorry. He beat Marco Namakani. People were very hyped up on him. I saw a lot of people picking him to beat Damon Jackson. I did pick Damon Jackson in that matchup, but now we've decided that maybe the 145-pound weight cut was too much for him, or he's decided to put on a lot of muscle and 155 can be his division. I just don't think this is a good matchup for him because Esteban Ribovics is probably one of the most exciting fighters on the UFC roster with the way that this guy fights. The way that Esteban Ribovics fights, especially in his fight against Thomas Paul, is he runs forward and just throws volume, man. This guy is an all-action striker. This guy's all-action in everything. He's also an all-action grappler. He kind of actually fights in a weird way of like a shoot box fighter where he's just all aggression. Everything he does is aggressive. He's always running forward, and he's not just running forward. This guy is throwing volume and just volume on volume and volume. And when the fight does go to the ground, he's always attacking for submissions. He actually, I believe it was like a Kimura that he had him very close against Loic Radzhabov when he was on bottom. But eventually, I do actually pick Ribovics to knock out Kamuela Kirk in the very first round with his come forward, high volume, high this output, everything style. He's minus 200. Kamuela Kirk is plus 170. I think Esteban Ribovics does find the KO blow in the very first round with just his very all-action run-forward style. It's interesting no one's really picking him to win by submission, because if you do look at Ribovics' record, he does have 5 wins by sub, but he probably does get it done on the feet against Kamuela Kirk in this matchup. And now we move on up the card, Yazmin Jauregui taking on Denise Gomes. And man, this is actually a fun fight. And this could be a good test for Yazmin Jauregui, because Yazmin Jauregui is a very hyped up prospect from Mexico. She's a fantastic fighter. She's 10-0. She debuted when she was 8-0 and took on Yazmin Lucindo. And they put on a fantastic performance. But at the end, it was Jauregui who was just the much more technical striker. The fighter that was landing slightly more volume. Lucindo was coming in. She was throwing hooks. She was doing her own thing. But it was Jauregui who was just the much more technical striker in that matchup. She took on Estela Nunes. She did face a lot of adversity in that matchup. She got hurt by Estela Nunes, but in the end, she did manage to knock out Estela Nunes eventually by knocking her down and finishing the fight with ground and pound. She's a great prospect. She is a great boxer, and she does have some grappling as well, but for the most part, she probably wants the fight to be on the feet. Now, Denise Gomes, she's a savage, man, and I really should have picked her to beat Bruna Brazil, and I was just blinded by Bruna Brazil's fantastic performance on Dana White's Contender Series, because what we saw was Denise Gomes come out there and just fight like a savage. You know, she came in there, she closed the distance against Bruna Brazil, she threw volume, she was just the fighter that just wanted to fight more, and Bruna Brazil was trying to keep it too technical. She had her chin up in the air, trying to fight from range, and Denise Gomes gave her no space, and she charged forward. This fight very much could actually be similar to Yazmin Jauregui versus Yazmin Lucindo, where Jauregui is the more technical boxer, trying to box from the outside, and Denise Gomes is Yazmin Jauregui running forward and rushing forward and throwing volume. So it could be another very fun fight. It could be another potential fight of the night kind of fight early on in the prelims. And Yazmin Jauregui is a great prospect. You know, she's 10-0, but I do think she does get it done over Denise Gomes in this matchup here. If you do look at Yazmin Jauregui, I believe she is a pretty big favorite. She's about minus 450. Gomes is about plus 300. That's a little bit disrespectful to Denise Gomes, because Gomes does have a good chance of just kind of rushing in there and maybe landing something on Jauregui. We have seen Jauregui hurt before, but I do think Jauregui does go out there. Just is the more technical striker. She can fight from range. I think she can kind of thwart off the attacks of Denise Gomes, and both of these girls can grapple as well, but for the most part, they probably do want to strike on the feet. So I'm going to go with Jauregui. I think that she does win by decision. I'm going to give Gomes the respect of being tough enough to go to a decision. I think Jauregui does beat her to a decision by being the more technical striker, being able to fight from range. And with that being said, we'll move on to Shannon Ross taking on Jesus Aguilar. Weird fight, and the only reason why it's weird is because Shannon Ross is a guy that was signed off Dana White's Contender Series off a loss, but he showed a lot of toughness in that matchup. He showed a lot of grit. He hurt Vinicius Salvador at points in that fight, and it turned out that he was fighting with like a really bad illness. I'm not too sure what it was, but he was fighting with like a weird illness or something that really is difficult to deal with, and just out of his toughness, Shannon Ross must have a really good manager, because the UFC decided to sign him despite the loss by knockout and despite literally getting knocked down like 3 or 4 times in that fight. But he come back, he took on Clayton Rodriguez, absolute nightmare matchup for him, because Clayton Rodriguez is a really, really good striker, and Rodriguez just kind of swarmed him and finished him. Jesus Aguilar can do a very similar sort of thing, but I would say Jesus Aguilar is more of like a wrestler grappler. A very interesting fact about Jesus Aguilar is most of his wins come by guillotine. This guy's got an insane guillotine. You look at his guillotine, he's got 1, 2, 3, 4 guillotines in his career out of 8 wins. It's insane how many guillotines this guy does have, but he does get away with it because he is quite short. He does have pretty short arms as well, only 62 inches of reach, but he's a very strong and compact guy. The way that he strikes, he kind of blitzes forward, throws combinations, then he'll duck down and he'll duck into a wrestling shot, and that's what I think he does do against Shannon Ross. I think this could actually be a similar matchup to Jesus Aguilar's fight on Dana White's Contender Series, where he took on Erison Fajea, who is a great fighter. I picked Fajea to actually win that fight, and Jesus Aguilar went out there and just wrestled him, took him down, grappled him, was just a bit of a savage, you know. Shannon Ross is an older guy at 125. He's taken a lot of damage in his last 2 fights. You know, he got KO'd twice, but he got, like, knocked down often against Vinicius Salvador, and we know now that Vinicius Salvador isn't really too special, you know what I mean? So it's not really a good look for Shannon Ross. I think we see Jesus Aguilar go out there, bomb away with his boxing on the feet, close to distance crash, and then go for takedowns. Aguilar's coming off that loss to Tatsuro Taira, but I believe he had Tatsuro Taira in like a guillotine for like the whole round, and then Tatsuro Taira quickly snatched up an armbar, looked really good, but Jesus Aguilar had success initially in that matchup. But I'm going to go with Aguilar by submission and by guillotine as well. I think he probably gets like a mountain guillotine where he's on top, but it's gonna be interesting to see what he can pull off in this matchup. And now you've got Sean Brady versus Jack Della Maddalena. I'm going to be going with Jack Della Maddalena in this one here, and I am going to look at the odds because he's minus 180, and Sean Brady is about plus 150 thereabouts, and Shannon Ross is about plus 280. Jesus Aguilar is about minus 210. I do like Jack Della Maddalena in this matchup, and I do like him quite a bit. It is, in a way, a nightmare matchup for him because Sean Brady is a grappler, and he's a very good grappler at that as well. But he's also a decent wrestler as well. We've seen Jack Della Maddalena taken down before, and we've seen him get in a submission attempt against Ramazan Emeev, but he did look good in that matchup. You know, he kind of survived the submission attempt, got up, knocked out Ramazan Emeev with a great body shot. The issue with this matchup for Sean Brady is, Sean Brady, we showed against Bilal Muhammad, this guy does not deal with adversity very well at all, you know, like Bilal Muhammad and him were striking on the feet. Sean Brady was looking pretty good on the feet, but it was against Bilal Muhammad. But as soon as Bilal Muhammad landed a couple of good shots, Sean Brady just didn't want to be there anymore, man. Like, he showed no toughness, he showed no will to keep fighting. He stopped throwing back, he kind of just bolted up against the cage and let Bilal Muhammad standing TKO him. Sean Brady just kind of gave up in that matchup as soon as he faced any adversity on the feet. And one thing I'm going to tell you he's going to face in this fight is adversity on the feet. Jack Della Maddalena is a fantastic boxer. We've seen it time and time and time again. And this guy keeps rising to the occasion every single time. You know, he took on Angelusa, who took him on short notice. One got signed. Took on Pete Rodriguez. Rodriguez took him on short notice. But then he knocked him out and looked great in that fight. Knocked out Emeev. Knocked out Danny Roberts. Knocked out Randy Brown. He keeps going up in competition. He keeps knocking these guys out. And I don't think it's going to stop against Sean Brady. I think Jack Della Maddalena goes out there and I think he knocks out Sean Brady in the first round. I can see Sean Brady winning this fight though with his wrestling and his grappling. He will be the significantly better grappler in this matchup. Not that we've seen a lot of Jack Della Maddalena's grappling in the UFC. But I just I think it's pretty safe estimate to say that Sean Brady will be the better grappler in the matchup. However, one thing I'm just going to say again, Brady doesn't like getting hit. I mean, nobody likes getting hit. But the way that Sean Brady just could not deal with any adversity whatsoever against Bilal Muhammad, I don't like that in this matchup against Jack Della Maddalena. I think Jack Della Maddalena is going to land often and early. And I think if Brady just kind of gives up again, JDM's going to put his lights out. So give me Jack Della Maddalena by knockout in the very first round in this matchup. And now we're going to move on to the featured prelim, Robbie Lawler versus Niko Price. Out of respect to Robbie Lawler, I would actually really like to see this be on the main card, but it is what it is. We've got Robbie Lawler taking on Niko Price, and it's just one of those fights, man, where it's like Robbie Lawler's 41 years old. I wish Robbie Lawler was fighting veterans. I wish it was like Robbie Lawler versus Matt Brown. I wish it was, you know, Robbie Lawler versus Court McGee. Yeah, but it's Robbie Lawler versus Niko Price. Now, Niko Price isn't the youngest guy in the world either, and Niko Price, once again, he's not really the best fighter in the world either. He's a very fun fighter. He definitely does add a lot of name value to the prelims of cards that he's on, but I think it might just be a little bit too much for Lawler at this point in his career, because Robbie Lawler is 41 years old. He's not really looking too good, and I think the odds kind of respected as well. At plus 220 is Lawler, minus 260 is Price. But one thing I'm going to say, Robbie Lawler probably is a pretty live underdog at plus 220. Not even gonna lie, but the problem is, like, Lawler was looking pretty good against Bryan Barberena. That was an interesting fight. It was a pretty fun fight as long as it lasted, but Barberena was just landing volume over and over and over again, and it just kind of built up against Lawler. Niko Price can kind of do the same thing. Niko Price is a very weird fighter. Like, he does everything. He grapples, he strikes. He just is a weird fighter. There's no real way to describe Niko Price's fighting style, but I think it probably will just be too much for Robbie Lawler, because Robbie Lawler's an older guy at this point. He has been on a losing streak, but two very good fighters, to be fair. Ben Askren was a long time ago. Colby Covington, you know, guy that's fought for the belt a couple of times. Neil Magny's Neil Magny, but Niko Price, I think it's just going to be a little bit too much for a 41-year-old Robbie Lawler. I think that's kind of what it comes down to. Robbie Lawler's probably going to want to strike with him. Niko Price can do anything. Niko Price can strike with Lawler if he wants to. He can take Lawler down if he wants to. So I'm kind of just going to go with Niko Price because he's the younger guy. If Lawler wins this fight, I think he's going to have to knock out Niko Price. But he couldn't knock out Bryan Barberena. So I don't know. I think Niko Price is like also pretty tough. It's pretty hard to say, because it is just an older guy and Robbie Lawler taking on Niko Price. But Niko Price hasn't been looking that good recently either, so I don't really know what to say in the matchup, unfortunately. But I do believe Niko Price does win this fight. He was looking pretty good against Phil Rowe before he did gas out and get KO'd on the third rounds. But I'm going to go with Niko Price. Not that confident in it, though. But now we can move on to the main card. Dan Hooker taking on Jalin Turner. And in this matchup, if I can use my mouse, I'm looking forward to it. I'm really, really looking forward to it. But I do not like this matchup for Dan Hooker, man. I kind of would have much rather Dan Hooker versus Michael Johnson, for example. I mean, not that this could happen now because Johnson just got KO'd, but that would have been a more suitable matchup for Dan Hooker. But instead, he's taking on the young up-and-comer in Jalin Turner, who's massive, 155 pounds, who's a great striker, who's getting better at striking, who's a great grappler. And it's not only that, he's got it out for us, man. I'm from New Zealand, you know, he's knocking out all of the Australian and New Zealand prospects. You know, he knocked out Brad Riddell, he knocked out Jamie Malaki, you know, he finished Joshua Culibao way back when. Like, he submitted Brad Riddell, sorry, but you know, like, he's got it out for Australia and New Zealand, dude. And now he's coming up to Dan Hooker. He's coming off one of the top guys in the lightweight division from New Zealand. And he's taking out Brad Riddell. He's coming for Dan Hooker. CKB, I don't know, CKB's probably not the biggest fan of Jalin Turner, but I do think Jalin Turner wins the matchup, and I do think he knocks out Dan Hooker. Dan Hooker's got a very fun style to watch. You know, he is a kickboxer, but the way that he does strike, he does kind of have his head up in the air. He throws a lot of kicks. You know, he kind of has his hands somewhat low. And I think he's just going to get caught by Jalin Turner, because Jalin Turner is a really good striker. And not only that, he's a really powerful striker. We saw it in the Mateusz Gamrot fight, which was very, very close. You could argue it either way. But he took on Gamrot on short notice, you know. And he looked really good in that fight for a guy that did not really prepare any wrestling for the training camp that he was meant to have against Hooker. And then he took on Gamrot instead. And after that Gamrot fight as well, one thing that he recognized was that he probably does need to improve his wrestling. So now Jalin Turner's gone and he's training with Khamzat Chimaev. So one thing that tells me is Jalin Turner's probably working on his wrestling, right? So, you know that Jalin Turner, if he has to, he can wrestle, but I don't think he's going to. I think he can strike with Dan Hooker. Dan Hooker probably is the more technical striker because he is a really, really good kickboxer. But I do think Jalin Turner's just going to catch him eventually. I think he can crush the distance. I think he can land a KO blow on Dan Hooker, who is somewhat hittable just with the striking style. And I think he just KO Dan Hooker as well. Dan Hooker's taken a lot of damage, you know, recently. You know, he got KO'd by Michael Chandler. Before that, he had the absolute war with Dustin Poirier. And then he got KO'd by Arnold Allen when he went down to 145 pounds. Man, like, he didn't look bad in that Arnold Allen fight, though. Everyone thinks he looked horrible. He actually didn't look that bad against Arnold Allen, but he did look slow. He come back, kind of fraud-checked Claudio Puelles, but, you know, anyone with a brain picked Dan Hooker. Like, so many people picked Claudio Puelles, and they do deserve to be called out for that pick, because that was stupid. But anyway, I think Jalin Turner does KO Dan Hooker. If he needs to, he can submit him too, because, as I said, Jalin Turner's been working on his wrestling, and, you know, a striker like Dan Hooker probably is a good opponent to... Hey, like, I want to showcase a little bit of my wrestling. Let's try and out-wrestle a striker. You know, maybe we do see a little bit of that. But I am going to pick Jalin Turner in the matchup. He is the favorite, minus 240. Dan Hooker's plus 205. You know, once again, maybe at plus 200, Dan Hooker's a live underdog, but I just can't see him not getting hurt in the matchup by Turner, who hurts everybody that he fights. So I think he's going to go out there and I think he's going to hurt Hooker and knock him out. And that does pain me to say. I've got a Dan Hooker t-shirt, literally right behind the camera, just over there. But anyway, Robert Whittaker taking on Dricus du Plessis now in this matchup. This is actually a matchup that seems to be dividing a lot of people. I'm seeing a lot of people on Dricus du Plessis, but I'm pretty confident Robert Whittaker gets it done. And the odds makers are as well. Robert Whittaker's about minus 400. Dricus du Plessis about plus 300, plus 375, plus 275, sorry. But I think Whittaker gets it done. The thing is, in my opinion, the UFC shouldn't have made this matchup. They should have just done Dricus du Plessis versus Israel Adesanya, because that seems to be a little bit of a money grab fight with the way that they're beefing against each other. But they've decided to do this instead. I think Robert Whittaker beats Dricus du Plessis, and for a guy that hasn't got a finish in a very, very long time in Robert Whittaker, the last time he finished anybody, I think, was in 2017 against Jacare Souza. I think he's going to finish Dricus du Plessis if Dricus du Plessis' cardio is still the same. I do understand Dricus du Plessis had horrible cardio in the past because this man literally could not breathe out of his nose. But if his cardio is still the same, and if he fights the same as he did against Derek Brunson, because that was a really shockingly horrible performance from both guys at the top of the middleweight division, Whittaker's going to finish this guy. I think he finishes a gassed out Dricus du Plessis in the second or the third round. The thing about Dricus du Plessis, though, in the past, when he has not been able to breathe out of his nose, I understand that he can now after he had surgery on his nose, he would still push it. You know, he'll be gassed out of his mind. He'll be breathing heavy with his mouth. You know, some people would say that he's not actually that tired. It's just the way that he breathes because he can't breathe. But he was tired. He was gassed. And he'd still push it, you know, against Brad Tavares. He was really tired in the second and the third round. But he'd just take a few breaths. And then he'll go. And then he'll step back. He'll take a few breaths. And then he'll go. The thing about Dricus du Plessis, when this guy is tired, you can still trust him to keep fighting. You know, you can still trust him to keep going, even though he does get tired. But against Robert Whittaker is a guy that is a level above these guys. You know, Robert Whittaker would have made it look easy against Derek Brunson instead of somewhat competitive for the short period of time that fight did last. And that was a really bad performance from both guys. But anyway, Robert Whittaker, you know, he outclassed Marvin Vettori on the feet. He did fight against Israel Adesanya in a fight which a lot of people thought he won. I do think Adesanya did win that fight, but it seems like I'm like in the minority on that opinion. And before that, he was just once again showing that he is better than all of the other contenders. You know, outclassing Cannonier, outclassing Gastelum. Close fight with Darren Till, but he did beat Darren Till in that matchup. I think he's going to do the same thing against Dricus du Plessis. Du Plessis is a great striker and he's a great grappler, but now I think he's reached the level of competition which he's not going to be able to get past in Robert Whittaker, who is a championship level opponent. If Israel Adesanya did not exist, Robert Whittaker would be the champion of this division, unless maybe Khamzat Chimaev come around, but that's for another day. I think Whittaker can wrestle in this matchup if he wants to. Dricus du Plessis is a dangerous grappler. He is dangerous on the feet as well. Former K1 kickboxer as well, but he's a great grappler in his own right, which people don't really bring up because he does have a lot of submissions on his record. But I don't think he can finish Robert Whittaker. I think he can go out there, and I do think he can finish the gassed out Dricus du Plessis in the third round, or just kind of outclass him on the feet to a decision. Robert Whittaker seems to be kind of getting better every time he fights. He was able to kind of mix it all up against Israel Adesanya with some wrestling, with some boxing. He kind of just outboxed the face of Marvin Vettori in that matchup. I'm going to go with Whittaker. I'm going with Whittaker by a late finish. A guy that has not finished in 6 years is Robert Whittaker. I think he gets a finish in this matchup in the later rounds, in like round 3, because Dricus du Plessis is going to slow down. He always goes hard in the first round and then gasses out. He did it against Darren Till. He did it against Brad Tavares. He goes hard, and then he gasses out in the first, after the first round. So I'm going to go with Robert Whittaker. In a fight that should be the featured prelim and not on the main card, we've got Bo Nickel taking on Tresean Gore. And I'm going to go with Bo Nickel. I think Bo Nickel can beat Tresean Gore. Once again, I'm seeing a couple of people pick Tresean Gore, and it is actually a really good opportunity for Tresean Gore to maybe make a massive name for himself. But I do think Bo Nickel can win this matchup here. Nickel is minus 1200 in the matchup. Tresean Gore's about plus 725. But we kind of learned a little bit about Bo Nickel in his last fight, because the truth is, he did kind of struggle to get that takedown against Jamie Pickett, and it seems like he hit Jamie Pickett with a nut shot to get the takedown, which was weird. And then he couldn't finish the arm triangle choke because he wasn't doing it correctly, and even the commentators were saying he doesn't know what he's doing in this position or something, but he ended up getting it anyway. But we kind of know that maybe Bo Nickel isn't a guy that's just going to go out there and beat Israel Adesanya, which is what some people were saying. Some people literally were saying Bo Nickel can make his debut and beat Israel Adesanya. I know this guy's got insane wrestling. I know he's looked really, really good on the Contender Series. He fought on the Contender Series twice. A lot of people disagree with that decision. I think it was the right decision, giving Bo Nickel more professional experience against better competition, because at the end of the day, Zach Borrego was 3-0 and isn't the best fighter in the world. He took on a much better opponent in Donovan Beard, who is a borderline UFC level fighter. He has lost recently, so it's not the best aging win, but it was a step up in competition from Borrego, and Bo Nickel got past both of them with ease. And then he took out Jamie Pickett in one round. As for Tresean Gore's a guy that is very, very hyped, and in my opinion, a little bit overhyped by a lot of people. I do love him though. Like, he does have a great personality. He's a very likable guy. He came in on the Ultimate Fighter at only 3-0 and made it all the way down to the finals. Pulled out of the finals because he got injured or something, but then he took on Brian Battle, lost against Brian Battle, and then he got KO'd by Cody Brundage, which is a very poorly aging loss. But then he cranked up the most insane guillotine choke over Josh Fremd, tried to pretty much take his head off with that guillotine and did get it done. But this is a big step up in competition from Tresean Gore, you know. Bo Nickel's a better wrestler than Cody Brundage, you know. Bo Nickel's a better kind of... Bo Nickel would get past Fremd. Bo Nickel would get past Brundage. Bo Nickel would get past Brian Battle, is kind of what I'm trying to say. Bo Nickel is that guy in wrestling, but in MMA, he still is potentially yet to kind of prove himself as like a top MMA prospect. I think he gets past Tresean Gore. Can Tresean Gore defend the takedowns? I don't think so, but I mean... who knows? Tresean Gore could knock him out, but I'm going to go with Bo Nickel to win. I think he wins by submission as well, as do most people. I would be very surprised if he knocked out Tresean Gore on the feet. It's an interesting fight. It's a fight I'm looking forward to. Should it be on the prelims and Robbie Lawler should be on the main card? I think so. You could even make an argument Brady versus Della Maddalena should be on the main card instead of this. But it is what it is. They're really trying to build a name out of Bo Nickel. It's interesting to see, but I think Bo Nickel does win by submission in the first rounds. Now we move on to Brandon Moreno taking on Alejandro Pantoja, and it is actually being advertised as the third fight, which is interesting because I thought that the UFC were going to try and advertise it as the second fight between the two, when in reality it is the third, even though the first one was an exhibition on the Ultimate Fighter. If you guys don't know, Alejandro Pantoja has fought Brandon Moreno twice, and he has won both fights. Now, if you do look at the odds, Pantoja, to my surprise, is the underdog. I mean, Pantoja's plus 140 and Brandon Moreno is minus 160. I genuinely thought Alejandro Pantoja was going to be the favorite. I mean, I'm quite surprised he's not. I genuinely am quite surprised he's not. And I am picking Alejandro Pantoja if that didn't give it away already. And I do think he can get by Brandon Moreno in the grappling. Now, I do understand Brandon Moreno is a significantly improved fighter than the fighter that took on Alejandro Pantoja all those years ago. Because if you do look way back at it, I think Brandon Moreno was like 21 years old the first time they fought each other on the Ultimate Fighter, which is a long time ago. You can kind of discard that. But the fight in 2018, you know, was a lot more interesting, a lot more recent, and Pantoja did manage to outclass him to a decision. And he's 24 years old in that fight, and he was only 22 years old in the first time they fought against each other. But now they rematch for the third time, and I do believe Pantoja does win this matchup. Now, a lot of people are going to be on Brandon Moreno in this matchup, and Brandon Moreno, I will give him the credit. He has improved drastically. This guy has gotten significantly better as a fighter, but so has Alejandro Pantoja. Pantoja's kind of been there, you know, in the background, you know, kind of sneaking past everyone, sneaking his way up to the title shot, and this is his time. Pantoja knows that this is his time to take the belt. He's a guy that has been training for Moreno ever since he actually beat Alex Perez. He knew that Moreno was going to be next, and then as soon as he beat Davison Figueiredo, Alejandro Pantoja was in the crowd and he was training. He knew that Moreno was next. So I've got Pantoja. This is a nightmare. It's not a nightmare matchup for Moreno. I just genuinely believe that Pantoja is like the guy to beat Brandon Moreno. You know, Brandon Moreno, everyone kind of has a guy that's like their nightmare matchup, that's a guy that's always going to get one over them. I think Alejandro Pantoja is that guy. Alejandro Pantoja, insanely high level grappling. The wrestling's come along. The striking's come along. Brandon Moreno will be the better striker in the matchup, but I do think he's going to be able to get out-wrestled and out-grappled by Alejandro Pantoja in this matchup. So I've got Alejandro Pantoja to submit Brandon Moreno in the first 3 rounds, and I think it might even be done in the second round. I've got Pantoja to win by submission over Brandon Moreno in this matchup. I'm very, very excited for it, but I do think Pantoja is just the much better grappler in the matchup. And we've seen Pantoja win twice. We've seen him outclass Moreno over 3 rounds, and we've seen him beat up Moreno in the very first time they fought. But Brandon Moreno was like 22 years old, so you can discount that first one. But in the second one, Pantoja just kind of out there outclassed him. I think he does it again, but I think he submits him in the first 3 rounds. So give me Pantoja to win by submission in that matchup. And now we move on to the main event. Alexander Volkanovski taking on probably the most difficult stylistic matchup for him at 145 pounds. And the odds don't really reflect that because Alexander Volkanovski is minus 420. Yair Rodriguez is plus 320. But it does just kind of tell you how good Alexander Volkanovski is, right? He's very good. And I do think he does win this fight. And I do think he does win this fight by decision. But the thing about this matchup is, this is probably the hardest stylistic matchup that Alexander Volkanovski can have in 145 pounds. Because if you do look into it, Yair Rodriguez, when he took on, Max Holloway in that loss, he was having so much success on the feet against Max Holloway. Max Holloway started resorting to takedowns to win rounds. You've never really seen Max Holloway ever have to do that before, right? And you go through, and he beat Brian Ortega by injury, but it was kind of an injury that was caused by a submission attempt from Yair Rodriguez, and Yair Rodriguez was winning the fight up until that unfortunate injury. Against Josh Emmett, Emmett did kind of hurt him a little bit very early on in the fight, but he took over the fight, outclassed Emmett, managed to get the submission, which is a very impressive win to submit Josh Emmett, a guy that Ilia Topuria didn't finish, but obviously styles make fights, it was a different matchup. I think Alexander Volkanovski wins, but he is in for a very tough fight against Yair Rodriguez, because we've seen Alexander Volkanovski, outstrike a guy like Max Holloway on the feet. But Yair Rodriguez was arguably outstriking Max Holloway on the feet for parts of that fight as well, to the point where, as I said, Max Holloway did have to resort to takedowns to beat Yair Rodriguez in rounds. And once again, Alexander Volkanovski in the grappling, if he wants to wrestle and grapple with Yair Rodriguez's grappling has been improving significantly. We saw that in the Brian Ortega fight where he submitted Brian Ortega, kind of did, kind of didn't. And then also when he also actually genuinely did submit and out-grappled Josh Emmett. We are seeing Yair Rodriguez improve his grappling significantly, which is obviously a part of his game in the past that we have seen kind of fail him a little bit, I guess you could say. Like when he took on Frankie Edgar, he was up and coming, he was KOing people, he was very exciting, he knocked out BJ Penn, KO'd Andre Fili with a head kick, he won the Ultimate Fighter Latin America season number 1, and he was that guy. He was a hyped up prospect going in, and then he took on Frankie Edgar, who just took him down and out-wrestled him for 2 rounds before the fight was finished. And then he took on Max Holloway after dodging a few USADA tests, because I believe he got suspended by USADA for dodging tests or something like that. And then took on Max Holloway after a very long time away from the sport. Looked really, really good in that matchup as well. So I've got to go with Alexander Volkanovski, though. Volkanovski is a fantastic fighter. He's a guy that just continually shows that he's a great fighter. And then he took on Islam Makhachev as well, upper weight class. We all thought Volkanovski was going to be too small. We all thought Islam Makhachev was going to knock him out with ground and pound in the second or third round. Well, that's what I thought. I think a lot of other people had similar predictions. But Volkanovski went out there, held his own against Makhachev. In my opinion, he did lose. But that was such a close fight. You genuinely can make an argument for Volkanovski winning that fight as well. So I don't really know where Volkanovski goes from here. I would like to see him fight Ilia Topuria at UFC 293 if he can get past Rodriguez. However, he does seem to have his eyes set on being a double champion. He does seem to have his eyes set on being a lightweight fighter. But I do like Volkanovski in the matchup. I do think he can get it done. He is... I've said this before and people have disagreed with me. Alexander Volkanovski is the most well-rounded fighter in the UFC. He's a great wrestler, he's a great grappler, and he's a great striker. He is the most well-rounded fighter in the UFC. He can do it all, but so can Yair Rodriguez. Yair Rodriguez can grapple. He's shown and proven very improved grappling in his last 2 fights. He's also shown very good striking in his last 3 fights as well, including the fight against Holloway where he was outstriking Holloway to the point where Max Holloway did have to go for takedowns to win rounds at points. So I'm going to go Volkanovski. This is a dangerous matchup. I'm seeing a lot of people picking Yair Rodriguez. I don't mind the pick, but, you know, we've seen Alexander Volkanovski dominate over this weight class for a very long time, and I don't think it really stops here. I do think Volkanovski is a fantastic fighter, and I do think he can get by Yair Rodriguez by a decision in this matchup. I think he mixes up both the striking with his wrestling. I can see Volkanovski striking with Yair Rodriguez maybe for 3 minutes, 3.5 minutes, and then just to kind of steal a round that could be close, does what Max Holloway did, and take him down towards the end of the round. Volkanovski is a smart fighter. He's one of the smarter fighters in the game. He follows a good game plan. He always has a good game plan for his opponents as well. He had a great game plan for Islam Makhachev. It didn't quite work out, but he had a great game plan to beat Holloway the 3rd time. Great game plan to beat Chen Sun Jung, which kind of wishes to beat him up, to be honest, which is sad, but true. Great game plan to beat Brian Ortega. Almost finished Ortega. Probably should have finished Ortega at the end of the 3rd round because Ortega needed help to get up onto a stool. That should have been a TKO. But I've got Volkanovski. I think Volkanovski gets it done. I think he wins by decision. And that is my predictions for UFC 290. Hopefully you guys did enjoy the video. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you made it this far and you haven't already subscribed, please do subscribe to my channel. And with all of that being said, I will see you guys in the next video. And I genuinely cannot wait for this card. And I will be doing a live fight companion for it. So I'll see you guys in the next one.